Hello and welcome. I'm Psychic Medium Roberto, and I hope you are truly well today. I'm going to be looking at the double case of Phoebe Handsjuk as well as Baillee Schneider, who in both cases were ruled as suicides. However, there was a lot of suspicion at the time around Phoebe's death, and Bailey's case has recently been changed from suicide to suspicious. Alright, so let's take a moment to focus and tune in. Please feel free to engage by hitting the subscribe button and notifications icon. In both cases, each woman, and I'm going to start by saying each young woman, both had dated Antony, Phoebe in 2010 and Baillee in 2018, who is a very successful marketing and events person, and was dating both these women at the time of their so-called suicides. Alright, so let's get into it. So I'm going to start off by looking at the Phoebe Handsjuk case, and this took place in 2010. Now in Phoebe's case, she was living in this high-rise apartment, and she committed suicide by jumping down from the 12th floor through a garbage chute and hit the bottom floor, and would suffer tremendous and horrific circumstances, having gone down the garbage chute and landed on the ground floor, where she sustained major serious injuries, and she would later succumb to those injuries while trying to crawl to safety. Now, this is the last known photograph of Phoebe. This was during the course of the morning. A fire alarm had gone off during the morning, and all the residents were evacuating, so there would have been a lot of people coming in and out. There were fire brigade people coming in to look for the fire, and of course there was no fire at the building. Now, who was Phoebe? Phoebe was an amazing soul, and she was born on May the 9th, 1986, and at the time of her death, she was 24 years old. Okay, and this was an incredible individual who had the ability to bring people together. She was outgoing, loved the arts, loved creative work. She was all about connection, family, friends, circle of friends, and of course she would experience some difficulty with the 5 in the May, but I wouldn't say it was a very bad 5, in that she wasn't an outcome 5, but she would experience difficulties in her life, and we do know, and it's common knowledge, that she did suffer with alcoholism and drugs, which is a common thing with 5s. And but what's really important is the outcome 11-2. This was a person about being connected with people, bringing people together, and I believe a very good person. And having died at the age of 24, that was all about connection, and that 6 is also about disconnection. Okay, so who was Antony Hampel, or who is Antony Hampel? Now, at the time of Phoebe's death, he was 43, and I can tell you now by looking at this guy's numbers, being an 8, 1, and a 5, he was very involved in, or has his own marketing and advertising events building company. This was a guy that knew how to use communication. He was skilled in communication, marketing, copywriting. You know, saying one word could increase your sales, saying the right word can increase sales, and a really great person when it came around to marketing and communication. However, the flip side of that is you also have the great manipulator. And I'll say it again, you also have the great manipulator in the 9 and 5, and this was a person that thought about himself first, was all about himself, the individual, very money orientated, also a big bullshitter on the other end of the scale. So in the day, he might have been this amazing marketing person, events person, building text copy to promote events, to promote for clients. But on the other hand, with that 5, becomes the great manipulator and can use words against people. Like in his daytime, he would use words to attract customers, but being an arsehole that he is, he can use those words to detrimental effect. And I think, and I believe in both cases, this is the case. We have the great master manipulator, criminally so. Okay. So Phoebe and Antony had been dating for a while, and of course, it's common knowledge that Phoebe was dealing with drug and alcohol issues. However, if you look at her path from when she was younger to where she was in that day, there was certainly a deterioration. And you should understand that when you have someone that can manipulate people, use information against people, as well as push people's buttons, you have the case where you have this flamboyant person who's out there living the life, very wealthy, a bit of a playboy type character, and of course he becomes a magnet for younger women. Now we must understand this guy was 43 at the time, and Phoebe was 24 at the time. So definitely a big age difference. There was definitely a big age difference, and of course, being in that kind of situation does lend itself to abuse, manipulation, being the elder person in the relationship. And of course, when in this case where you have Phoebe who becomes start relying on alcohol and drugs, there is a very close connection to how that actually happened, and I'll get into that a bit later. So what do we have here? So on the day, when we look at the date of birth of these two characters, right? Yes, there are some similarities in their date of birth, and the only real connection we have there is the 5s, and that is the party element, that is the fun time element, and definitely the manipulation on his side, where you see the 14 is about older men and younger women. Older men and younger women, and can only lead to abusive situations. And we see the similar 14-5 in Phoebe, and that's her vulnerability in terms of being attracted to older men, but in most cases having a good time, partying, and also the drug element as well. Okay. However, Phoebe having that 11-2 as an outcome is also about justice and doing the right thing. And I would say in most cases she would do the right thing. I don't think you would find this person being going against the law. Of course, taking drugs is against the law, but in the main, let's call it recreational drugs. But the appeal was certainly in the bullshit that he would feed her, how they would meet, as well as the good life, the partying, the drug scene, the alcohol scene, living the life. And that was the actual attraction between the two. There's very little else to suggest that why she would be attracted to him, other than he was the man about town, had the money, had the prestige, had the company, lived in a beautiful high-rise apartment, and that was the appeal. That is the only connection between these two. And there's going to be a general theme in this episode, and that is toxic relationships. All right, where you have the senior and the junior, and it's always going to be manipulative from the adult side, or let's say from the older side. And let me tell you, this Antony was or is the great manipulator. Now, if we look at the day Phoebe's death was recorded, which was December the 2nd, 2010. Now, let me just call up my messages that I received here, because this is not all about numerology. So let me just also say the reason why I use numerology at times is, when cases are clouded in suspicion, deception, negative energy, it does at times cloud my visions, or if I need to get clarity on what I'm seeing, feeling, or hearing, numerology provides that answer for me. In some cases, psychics may use tarot cards. I like to use numerology as my backup, as well as to just see if I'm actually seeing what I'm seeing in relation to the numbers. So if we have a look here on December the 2nd, 2010, what we have here is obviously this is the end of the year. We know it's common knowledge that Phoebe on the day had been taking alcohol, had been taking several antidepressants as well as sleeping tablets. Her toxicology report at the time was very high, almost 3 or 4 times over the legal limit. So we pretty much have an incapacitated woman at this stage. Okay. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers and the visions that I've been seeing, is we should understand that this is the chute, this is the garbage chute that Phoebe was alleged to climb into on the 12th floor of the high-rise building, and she would have to, according to these tests that were done, it would take a lot of difficulty, first of all, to get into that situation. Now, just keep in mind, as I mentioned just recently, that is, she was highly intoxicated, full of chemicals, whether it was illegal drugs as well as antidepressants. Now, it would require a lot of precision and skill and patience to get into that chute, to go down the chute. Now, there have been comments made, so why didn't she just jump off the balcony? So if she was so desperate, why then did she climb into the chute and go down that way versus climbing over her balcony and jumping off the balcony? Now, the message I received for this case are the following. I definitely get the sense of Phoebe being shoved and pushed down the chute and not her getting in on her own. Now, why did the feet go in first versus the head going in first? Because if you put the head and arms in first, that person is going to resist being shoved down the garbage chute. So she was held by her wrists and arms and put down the chute. Now, keeping in mind, she was very intoxicated, 3 times over the limit, plus the antidepressants and the sleeping pills. There's actually a very good case that we could argue that she was actually unconscious at the time of the shoot. And let me see if I pick that up. She was definitely half in and out during the incident, and I believe she was definitely shoved down the chute, is the impression that I'm getting. And I believe the reason why Antony wanted to get rid of her was, in his mind, was becoming a bit of embarrassment. In his mind, she was becoming an embarrassment and going overboard. And let me say, this woman was not afraid of speaking up her mind. She would definitely speak up her mind. And there could even be an instance here of, and I'm just picking that up in her age, that there could have been some kind of argument. There was definitely some kind of backwards and forwards. And I believe there were issues leading up to this particular day, but there was definitely an element of a breakup or a disconnect in Phoebe's mind with Antony. She definitely was realizing, I think she was coming to a sense of, she was realizing how her life had turned, and he was making it worse, not making it better. So we have a situation here where we have a relationship that becomes a toxic relationship, so much so to the point, and this is just because of the nature of Antony, he would just discard her as garbage. Down the garbage chute, because that's who he is. This guy is a mean bastard, a terrible, terrible human being. And with the 5 outcome in his date of birth, he didn't care one single bit. Now, there's another theme that's happening in these cases, and that is, and I mentioned this up front, during the day he could write the best text, the best copy, the best advertising to promote events, for products, for the event. He exactly knew what to say and what to do to get business. And in this case, he knew and said to get Phoebe to the state that she was in. Now, there are many cases, recent cases only, where we find that partners, male and female, can be very abusive and manipulative through text messages. There are cases where boyfriends have killed themselves because a girlfriend was sending them terrible messages. There have been cases of girls and women being taunted online that end up in suicide. And I believe we have the same situation here where Phoebe was being manipulated over time, driving her to the point that she was in. And you must remember, he was a manipulator. He was psychologically and mentally abusing her. And these things are very difficult to prove in a court of law. How can you prove someone saying something has X amount of impact on a person? And over time, he took advantage of her vulnerabilities and he drove her to the point where she was consuming large amounts of alcohol, drugs, antidepressants. Now, I'm not saying that she didn't have the propensity for it, but he knew how to manipulate her into those situations and he took full advantage of it. And I believe we have this in this case where an older male, and we see that in the 14, the older male, younger woman being manipulated, the 5, and the 3, and I've mentioned this in several cases before, where you have these close-knit relationships where that 3 of manipulation and abuse comes in. And of course, unfortunately, Phoebe experienced a terrible, terrible way to die with that 8. And that 8 was very violent. You can imagine falling down 12-story chute, being clipped and hit within that tunnel until she hit the bottom. There's evidence of her trying to crawl out of the garbage can, out of the room to safety, and unfortunately she had bled out due to the nature of her injuries. So I believe we have the great manipulator here, and we have, through negative words and even grooming or conditioning, even at that age, he was a manipulator of words. You forced her into the situation she was in. And I still getting the feeling that she was pushed down by her shoulders, down the chute. She was pushed down the chute. I can feel the impressions on her shoulder. She was being pushed down the chute. And I've been just shown an image. I keep seeing an image with Phoebe, in Phoebe's case, that the guy was walking, having done what he did, wearing the black gloves, on the phone, saying, it is done. It is done. And I find it very suspicious in the case of Phoebe. Twice, I believe, or however many times the alarm went off in the building, creating chaos, people moving around. Very difficult to pinpoint who's in and out the building. Someone could have easily slipped in at the time and also got to Phoebe, who would have got to Phoebe. And I do believe I received a message from Phoebe to her father saying, "Don't worry, Daddy, remember the good times." Don't worry, Daddy. Remember the good times. So 8 years later, we have a similar situation in Baillee Schneider, who was dating Antony at the time. And at the time of their relationship, he was 50 years old, 50, and she was 25. So who was Baillee? Baillee was born on February the 19th in 1993, and she was 25 at the time of her death. Okay? And at the time she was 25, which is an outcome 7, and we see in her date of birth that her outcome was a 7. Now this is all about freedom and life and jet setting, and we know she did modeling and traveled around a bit. And yes, she, like most young kids, would enjoy having a good time, partying, and all that kind of thing. Now, if you look at her numbers, the 2, 1, and the 4, the 3, and the 4, this is a very together woman. She was in control of who she was. She was an emotional type person, ruled by the 2 in the February. We know February is a water sign, but a lot of emotion. But with her individuality, which is the 1, she would have control. She would be all about the design, how she looks. We know she did some modeling. Now that 4 is very important in this case. That 4 is very important in this case. That 4 is all about facts and figures, right, wrong, being grounded. Yes, she might go party for a night, but then she won't party for another 6 days. That's what a 4 will do. The 4 will give perspective as well as being grounded in her life. And that 3, and the combination of the 3 and giving the outcome 7, technically this woman should not have died when she did, in my opinion. With those kind of numbers, this woman was all together. So what happened? Now we know over time, through coercive psychology, through manipulation, abuse through words, we definitely have a situation here where Antony was again manipulating. We see that 14-5 again, which is a younger woman, which pings on Baillee's 4. And we definitely see that 4 pinging on the day that she died, the outcome 4, as well as the 5. Now, let's get this straight. Yes, it was reported that Baillee had hung herself, but having done the forensics as well as analyzing the crime scene, the question is, it was almost impossible that she had strangled herself. Okay? It's actually almost impossible from a human point of view to strangle yourself. Okay? Now, she was found having cord around her. Now, there was no visible signs or realistic place where she could have put that cord to hang herself. And I'm getting that feeling again. It's a terrible feeling, man. I must tell you guys, doing some of these cases and experiencing what the victims went through really takes its toll on me. And I'm getting the impression here that there was a male figure wearing black gloves, same black gloves, funny enough, as Phoebe. I saw black gloves there as well. There are definitely black gloves being using the cable strangling from behind of Baillee. There was definitely a third person involved. Now, if you look at the day that she died, June 23, 2018, okay? Now, we have a situation here, though, that 11-2, we saw that in the Natalie Wood case, where we had that 11-2. This is the injustice that had occurred against Baillee. Okay, so what we have here is the 6, which is now, okay, so let's take one step back. It's reported that Baillee called Antony to break up the relationship. Okay, She had broken up the relationship with Antony. Now, let me take you through the numbers. Now, you look at the day that she died. That red 5 represents Antony, and that green 6 is the breakup, the disconnect, and the year that it was in was the 11/2. Now, in most cases, a couple will break up amicably, no problem. But when you have a young woman, and let's be honest, a young, beautiful woman, breaking up with a 50-year-old male who has since passed his prime, that is a huge ego deflator. A huge ego deflator when a young, beautiful woman breaks up with this outgoing 50-year-old, very wealthy person, man about town. That is a huge insult. So we can just imagine, and I'm getting that sensation now as I was about to say it actually. Now, can you imagine what he would have said to her when she was breaking up with him? The vile and the untruths and the disgusting language used over the phone. Antony, the 6 and 5 combined gives you the 11/2. He took this very badly. He took this so badly that he just ripped into her completely. And she would have also said some things that pissed him off. And we see 2 injustices. 1, what he said over the phone, and 2, what had happened to her, the strangulation. Now, I keep getting, and this also applies to Phoebe, that there's possibly a third person who may have carried out the dirty work. And I'm picking this up again. And I'm seeing the same impression, gloves, hands, in the case of Baillee. The double life of Antony Hampel. So let's have a look here. 815. This guy was definitely the great manipulator. And you know that 9, if we're looking at his date of birth, that 9, and we saw that with the John Ramsey also having that 9. That 9, and in most cases, the good side, creative, invention, great ideas, but it can also be the death or coming up with murder. And we have that in the case of Antony Hampel. This guy was a life path 5 with 8 in him, and the 9, this man had the propensity for murderer. And I'll just like to leave you, and just a caution as well, we've all been in some level of toxic relationships. And I would just advise, if you feel you are in a toxic relationship, please evaluate your situation, because you don't want to get into a situation where the manipulator feels out of control and takes control, and the only way they take control is by abuse or violence, or in this case, murder. And I've pointed some arrows to him. Now, if you look at this power and control in relationships, sexual abuse, financial abuse, sexism, power and control, emotional abuse, heterosexism, this man had it all. Thank you for watching. Please leave your comments and suggestions below. I would love to hear from you. And I will see you in the next one. Stay safe and stay alert.